rocky areas out here in the middle. They're going to be set up. Let me find. Oh, they're going to be set up in these deeper areas. There's a ton of these rocky spots. I mean, you have all this rock that's through here. You have all this rock that's through here, like a ton of stuff. You have this boat ramp. You have these rocky points right here that are good in the winter. You have this rock here, this little like rocky stretch here. So if you kind of start taking a look at it, there's a ton of stuff, all this rock through here. And it's almost to the point where you can't fish all this throughout a given day. So it kind of goes from not having any cover out here to fish. Now you have, 30 spots to check out. Mm-hmm. And that's how I always try to think about it, is you have to, when there's lakes like this, you have to look for the irregularities. There's no other way to go about it. And even when you're trying to fish up shallow, finding those areas where the deeper water cuts into the shallower water, that is so key to try to catch these fish, because otherwise, I mean, everything looks pretty uniform out here. Like on this big flat, there's like nothing unique about anything on this flat. And so I'm not going to try to fish any of this. I'm going to wait until I find something that's, unique, which out here there really isn't. Like in this area, there isn't really anything that's, to me, that stands out in this whole area through here. There's like no rock or wood or anything. The only thing that really starts to stand out is maybe like this, which isn't that interesting, but it starts to get better right when you get into this zone and see where right here now that water comes up and that it gets a little bit deeper. That rock starts to stick out and hit the water. Right here, like where you have that flat water connecting to a little bit steeper bank, that's like a key little stretch right there. Same thing happens on this side. Right here is going to be a key stretch on this riprap where it goes from steeper to flatter. And any of these sorts of changes, that's going to be massive on this, lake that looks so uniform.
Yeah. How about on those deeper spots, like where it goes from shallow to deep up on the dam? It's a big walleye lake, so the walleye like to hang out there as well. What is the relation going to be like between the bass and the walleye?
I find that a lot of times, especially in the spring, the walleye and the bass will set up in the exact same locations, which is weird. Like I'll catch a 22-inch walleye on Beaver Lake or Table Rock Lake, and then the next cast I'll catch a 3 or 4 pound largemouth.
Okay. What about in the summertime?
Same thing in the summertime. I catch fewer walleye in the summer, but offshore you will catch them every once in a while. And the big thing is that they want to feed on the same thing the bass are feeding on, which is bait fish or crawfish or bluegill. Really, they feed a lot on the bait fish. And so if there's a bunch of bait fish, for example, on this grass line out here, and there's grass that sticks down this edge here, and there's rock, if there's a bunch of bait right there, the walleye want to be there too because they need to eat, just like the bass do. Mm-hmm. And so I always focus on trying to find a mixture of where the walleye I'm not trying to figure out where the walleye are. I don't care about the walleye, but I'm trying to figure out where the mixture of the rock and the grass and the bait fish are. Because where you have all three, your chances of finding bass are a lot higher.
Okay. And it's outside edges of that grass, right? I mean, you're not casting right into the middle of it. So necessarily, unless there's a hole or something.
If that grass grows all the way out to here, like all the way out in the center, I'll just fish just that rocky stretch. Because a lot of times that'll cause there to be a hole in the grass or something irregular. So it just depends. Like, for example, right here, if that grass grows all the way out to 15, 20 foot of water out here, I'll be fishing this inside the actual weed edge or grass edge to the irregularity. Same thing like on these big points over here. Like if I find a bunch of rock out here and there's grass that grows all the way out on this flat and it grows out to the edge on this edge, well, I'll fish the rock here, 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 and here, and I'll actually go into the grass bed itself, past the edge, into the actual like field of grass, and start pitching or throwing the cutter worm around these rocky areas. Because a lot of times, again, wherever the rock is, there's not going to be any grass growing. And those holes in the grass are great ambush points for the bass and a great feeding spot for the bait fish and like bluegill and stuff. So that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Okay. And is a lake like Thunderbird basically going to set up the same way? Your bait selection is going to look a little different for a very dirty lake compared to a clear lake like Hefner?
Yeah, basically with Hefner, I'd be fishing a lot more Like if I'm fishing in the grass, you can fish a jig and a you can fish a jig and fish like a crankbait, stuff like that. But mainly in the winter, you can catch them on a crankbait and a jerkbait and stuff on both lakes, Thunderbird or in here. But I'd be fishing a lot more like a shaky head and dragging around like a Carolina rig or a drop shot on Hefner versus on Thunderbird. I mean, I'm literally just going to be throwing like a jig, a crankbait, and a spinnerbait year round. Just to stir the water. And here, there's a lot more man-made brush piles. Like if you want to go catch fish, you can go crush them on Thunderbird right now, throwing a 10-inch worm and a football jig in brush piles, man-made brush piles. There's a million of them in this lake. And just find brush piles in 10 to 15 foot of water, and you'll catch a bunch of 3 to 4 to 5 pound bass.
Just off main lake points, mainly?
Yeah, they plant them everywhere. Like there's just local Thursday nighters, and there's just guys that plant brush all the time. And every Thursday night there's one with like 18 to 20 pounds of largemouth every single night, just for like a 4-hour tournament.
Okay.
And you can just graph, like, they'll just drop brush piles literally everywhere. They don't want to drop them on, like, obvious stuff because everyone will find them. So a lot of guys just plant brush. Like, you could literally just start your boat, launch it, like, here, and just idle from here all the way around, and you'll find, like, 40 brush piles. They're just everywhere.
Okay.
And you can catch them offshore. It's, honestly, if I had to go to one lake right now to go catch fish in this Oklahoma City area, I would just go to Thunderbird. That's where the best fish are biting. And
Good to know.
Fish brush piles.
Thanks. And you said worm jig or a crankbait, spinnerbait, and a jig?
Yeah, I mean, really, this time of year, I would be fishing a... there'd be 2 baits I'd be fishing if I was going out there. Why did I pull up that? I want Tech Warehouse. Is a Strike King 6XD in the Chartreuse powder blue back, or like just a chartreuse color, something like this. Throw that, and you can crank that in the brush piles. Just like bang it through the brush piles, and that crankbait has a pretty big bill on it, and it will come through the brush really well. And then another bait that's really good is a Zoom Old Monster. And I'm recording this, so you'll see all the baits and stuff.
Okay.
Zoom
I've actually gotten those recommendations last time, so.
Yeah, Zoom Old Monster 10-inch worm. And then I had that new jig I just put out with Jewel Baits. This is like the best brush pile jig ever. It's so good.
Yeah, it's all. Congrats on that. It's big time.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Very cool.
But yeah, this jig is so awesome. It's good for brush piles. That's what I actually was going to call it the Fish the Moment brush pile jig. And then I started, because I was just finding it worked really well in brush. And then I was experimenting with it more, and we changed up the head shape, and we changed up a few things to make it come through rock better. The original design was really good for brush, but it wasn't great in rock, and so we had to like redesign it all because we wanted to make it more versatile. So now it works in brush and in rock. So
right,
it's a really good jig. But yeah, so I mean,
and on that Old Monster, are you going like black and blue and June bug out there on that dirty lake?
The best color for the Sumo Monster by far is plum apple. Okay. I throw that plum apple. It's the only color in that worm I throw, regardless of water clarity.
Even in
I don't know why it works so well. It just is so good.
Okay.
And I would throw this with a 3/8 ounce tungsten sinker. Just a regular slip sinker. It doesn't really matter which one. This is whatever, but just a 3/8 ounce slip sinker. This isn't coming 3/8. I just get my sinkers from Walmart. These bullet weights. Just a black 3/8 ounce weight. It works fine. And I always peg it when I'm fishing it in brush. Just put a bobber stop over the top of it. Yeah. And I just run it with an offset Gamakatsu
4/0, 5/0.
5/0 offset worm hook. Just straight up one of these 5/0, and that's it. And just rig it up and just throw it out there in those brush piles, and you can just kind of mark them with your fish finder, spin around, fire out there, and catch them.
Okay.
And the deal with the brush piles on Thunderbird is you just have to fish like 20 or 30 of them in an 8-hour day to catch your fish. Like in these night tournaments, these guys know exactly which brush piles have the fish. But if you don't know which ones they're in, you just kind of have to just graph and just find as many of them as you can and just throw a worm in there. And I always say throw a crankbait in there for 3 casts, Throw the worm in there for 4 casts. If you don't get bit within your first 7 casts in the brush pile, leave. Go to the next one. If they're there, they will bite you within your first 7 casts in the brush pile every single time.
Okay. So you're not even checking to, you're not really looking for bait fish and fish in the brush piles because they could be, I guess, hunkered down. Just throw some casts out there and move on if they're not biting.
Yeah, and I've used to get really picky about that, where I try to make sure I see fish in the brush pile, and when I do see them in the brush pile, I know I'm going to catch them. But I've got to a point now where I don't even bother with that, because sometimes they're just lone, 2 or 3 big fish. They're just kind of sitting there and you don't quite see them. And it's so fast to just pull up and make 7 casts that it's worth it. Yeah. And even if it only works out 1 out of every 5 times, where most of the time you don't get bit, but sometimes you do, 1 out of every 5 times, well, it only takes you 10 minutes to fish the brush pile, so you're only wasting, an hour of your day. And it's not like, unless you have 100 brush piles that have fish in them, or 15 brush piles have fish in them, it's hard to just fish brush with fish that you see on your graph, because otherwise you'll just spend way too much time graphing and you won't be able to fish enough to catch them.
Okay.
Yep. And on Thunderbird too, if you're going out there, the best part of the lake to do that is from here to the dam, and then from the dam up to about here. So this section of the lake is all you need to worry about.
A little bit cleaner area, looks like.
Yeah, the clearer water.
Okay.
And, I would say brushing 8 to 15 foot is kind of the deal. 8 feet to 15 feet of water. And again, don't get caught up on Thunderbird. Don't get caught up on the type of what the cover looks like, the points or whatever. You're just as likely to find an awesome brush pile right here off of the middle of nowhere and nothing, or out here in the middle of nowhere, as you are off of a really nice point that looks obvious. Because most of the time the points that look obvious like this, everyone's going to go graph them. No one's going to go look down a random bank that looks like this, and there's a brush pile right there that some dude planted, and you can catch him just as well off a brush pile there as you can off of an obvious point, right here.
Right. Is that a pretty good strategy on your average summertime fishery? I mean, they get so much pressure. That's when everybody's fishing. Is it best to just graph around and try to find some cover?
That's what I do, and even on a Hefner, if I was out here and I didn't have the Google Earth stuff, I would just start putting my boat in it's super clear water, so I put my boat in 15 to 20 foot of water and maybe graph out to as deep as 30 up to that 15 foot range, maybe up to 35, and I would just kind of randomly graph out here until I found some cover. And it might take me an hour to find some cover, but once I start finding cover and I start seeing bait fish, then I can start kind of dialing in where these fish are. And until I start seeing some sort of grass, some sort of wood, some sort of rock, I'm not going to bother fishing. And that goes for anywhere in the summer, any of these lakes around here. Sometimes it's a lot easier to find cover, and then you have to be more picky. Like on a Grand Lake, if you go to Grand Lake, you can find cover every 5 feet because there's so much cover and there's so much going on. Even if you go over to, the Lake Eufaula, you'll have a ton of cover everywhere. But the harder part is actually finding finding cover on lakes where it's void of cover. It just takes a lot of time behind the graph driving to find them.
Yeah. Okay. So I go out on Saturday morning and start at sunrise. Basically, how would you approach this lake? I mean, are you going to even touch on a topwater bite or even care about something like that?
What I would try to do is, honestly, I would start my day by just driving around this lake. I would kind of have these areas mapped out of where the majority of my waypoints are. So I would go through here and I would kind of look at this and I would say, okay, where are the majority of my waypoints on this lake? We didn't drop all the waypoints. I'll just drop a couple more here just to make sure we have. I kind of want to have an idea of where all of the good cover is in the lake, where I found the good rocks and sticks. And I can't do this on every lake because not every lake has these lake drawn down and stuff like that. But I'm just going to drop some waypoints just kind of here just to show where these little depressions are and stuff like that. So we got this. So basically, if you look here on the map, there's 3 sections of this lake that look like it has pins dropped. Here, kind of this area here, and this area up here. And so what I would first start by doing is I would probably say I'm going to start down in this area of the lake just because there's more diversity. It looks like there's pins that are back in the backs of a creek. There's pins that are further out in the more towards the main lake, and then this is just kind of concentrated in this one little area here. And I would start graphing to see where the bait fish are. So I would pull in here and I would start driving my boat and start seeing, is there bait fish in the back of this creek? And really all I'm doing with that is I'm just going to try to see on Uchi. This is a recording of, oh, not this one. Okay, here it is. I'll just graph out in the middle of like 20 or 30 foot of water, maybe 40 foot of water, and I'm just going to look for bait balls. And if I start seeing bait fish, that tells me that there's got to be some bass in that area, because if there's bait fish there, those bass are going to want to feed on them. And so I'm just looking for bait to start out. And a lot of times I'm not looking for areas where I'm just flooded with bait. You mentioned that before you had areas that were just absolutely littered with bait. And actually, sometimes that can be to your disadvantage. Because if you get into an area, for example, that looks like this on your fish finder, where you have like so much bait that all the bass have to do is literally open their mouth and like swim forward and they're eating bait fish, they have no incentive to eat your fishing lure in that sense, in that case. So I don't like when I see like a football field worth of bait fish. Instead, I want to find these areas where I have bait fish that are maybe the size of like a dime to a silver dollar. And then once I find bait fish in that quantity, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I found a bunch of bait fish out here. Now I'm going to look adjacent to these areas and say, okay, there's cover here, rocks, wood, and there's really not that much else going on. So I'll say, okay, I see there's bait fish in here. Now I'm just going to fish, and let's say I find a grass line right here, and we know the rocks are right there. I'm going to fish this grass line with the rocks and fish like the grass line with the rocks here. If I don't get bit, then I'm going to roll around and I can see, okay, found some bait fish, there's bait fish here. Now I'm going to try to fish all of these rocky spots through here. And then if I start catching them, let's say, on rock in 19 foot of water on the edge with some grass, then I'm just going to try to replicate that around the lake to try to find more areas. Conversely, you might find that these areas here, maybe the areas I'm showing here with this rock, maybe these are too shallow. Maybe the bait fish that you're seeing sometimes are deeper than that. Maybe instead of seeing bait in 15 or 20 foot of water, the bait's in 30 foot of water, like super deep. Well, what that might mean is that you might need to be graphing in 30 foot of water. So what I might do is I might actually start and find that the bass I'm catching, or the catchable bass, are like out here beyond where I can actually see the cover. So I might just have to start randomly graphing out here in 30 to 40 foot of water to see if I can find cover and I can find bait fish around that cover. And once I do, I'm going to try to fish them with like maybe a drop shot or a jig or something. And I'm going to just keep doing that, repeating, running into this area, looking for bait, looking for cover. And sooner or later, one of these areas, this zone here, is going to have the correct amount of bait. You're going to identify the correct cover, whether it's rock, grass, stumps, whatever it is, and then you're going to start catching fish, and you can then replicate that around this area of the lake and catch more and more fish.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Especially on that northeast side. I mean, I'm talking like ultra clear water. Is it going to be better to downsize, like maybe even a Ned rig or something like that in that type of situation?
Yeah, a Ned rig would be a good call. You're just going to have to kind of go real slow. One thing I find is that when you get in the summer on these really clear lakes, the only easy ways to go catch these fish is to, I guess there's two easy. The better ways to catch these fish is to either find some sort of offshore brush or like some hard cover offshore, or get around the grass. And if you can find some fish around that grass, you can catch them really well. Another thing, though, to call out is that this time of year on the lake like this, if you're not having success catching them offshore, one thing that's really a really good technique is to go up shallow, actually, and go way back in the backs of these, like, I'm talking like way back in these pockets and these bays back in here. And what happens is at this time of year, every single full moon and new moon, you're going to have bluegill that starts spawning. And when the lake is back up at normal pool, the bluegill will spawn these little bays and pockets and coves. And there'll be little laydowns and trees and just logs and stuff that stick in the water There's going to be some boat docks and stuff like background in here, and just isolated pieces of cover down the bank. And what the bass will do is when these bluegill start spawning, there's going to be about 20% of the bass in the lake, and a lot of these are your bigger bass, that will literally just cruise down these banks trying to feed on these spawning bluegill. And you can catch a lot of these fish by throwing, my favorite bait to throw is the Kelly J prop bait. It's a Lucky Craft prop bait. And what you do is literally throw that thing up there, and I throw it in like a bluegill color. And I'll throw that thing up to the to where the bluegill beds are, pop it 5 or 6 times, and a lot of times they'll fish like the edge of the bluegill beds, and they'll look like this, up shallow.
Yeah, in fact, I have actually got that exact bait upon your recommendation last time. So
awesome. Yeah, those like bluegill beds like that. That is something. And the deal. What's up?
See those on graph from time to time in different spots around the lake.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, if you find them offshore or up shallow, what will happen is that if you can find any sort of cover, like a lay down log or something close by, what will happen is that let's say you have a lay down log like right here where that pin is, then you have that bluegill bed right here. Those bass are going to be setting up on that log close by the bluegill beds, and then when they come out, when the bluegill get off the beds, the bass will come and eat them. And so I like to throw my bait by the log, not by the actual bluegill bed itself, because that's where the bass are going to set up. And the same thing can happen offshore. Like if you find a bluegill bed out in the middle, if you can find a rock or a stick that's close by to the bluegill beds, cast at the log or the stick. Don't cast at the bluegill bed itself, and that's usually how you can catch those fish.
Okay. Yeah, and that's another popular spot. Typically, the times that I hit the backs of those creeks is when I drive up and there's not a lot of boats there, because that's commonly probably the first or second spot that a lot of people do is they'll just even some of the sponsored guys come out and they just hit that thing with a spinner bait or swim bait, sometimes a square bill. There's in that cove to the left of where you are, right in there. There's tons of laydowns everywhere, and so I've had good success in there when there's not a lot of boat pressure. Yeah. But is it good to stick to top water, or what would your strategy be going through those areas with all those laydowns
this time of year? I would throw between that Kelly J prop bait, and then that one, or then just like a Spro frog, especially if there's grass up there and there's like holes in the grass. You can throw like a Spro bronze-eye poppin' frog up in and around like the holes in the grass and stuff, and you can catch some really good ones. I like the red ear color. Where are you? This one. And just like pop that around up shallow. And I find that in August, September time, it's really, really hard to beat that prop bait and that frog up shallow, especially in clear water, and especially if there's grass around. Really hard to beat, and you can catch them. You don't have to go back in these obvious pockets. You can go back in like this pocket back in here, around like all these trees and stuff like this. There's a ton of potential targets for these brim to spawn around. It's like all of this in here is good. You could even go back in like this pocket back in here and find fish. You can get away from the fishing pressure because the bluegill will spawn everywhere. You can even find them over in this pocket over here. And like there's a bunch of little random laydowns and stick ups and bushes and stuff, and just you're not gonna get a ton of bites doing it. It's like a 6 to 8 bite a day sort of technique, but when they're on it, you can get 5 big ones doing it. Catch 13 to 15 pounds.
Yeah, a lot of times what I'll do is if I drive up to those really clear spots, and actually if I don't visually see fish. Or bait fish in the area, I usually don't waste time fishing them like that west corner that you just pointed out. It's really clear over there too, so I try to kind of avoid those areas if possible.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's the clear water definitely isn't a problem. It just makes them a little bit trickier to catch. One thing that I find is if you can get a day where you have some cloud cover and some wind and some rain, a really good way to catch them this time of year is just a a buzz toad buzz bait. This is the one that throws War Eagle buzz toad buzz bait. This is a black blade, black bait. And when it's cloudy and windy and kind of rainy, you can just take that bait and just burn down the bank. And a lot of those bass will get aggressive and get up shallow, even in like August, September time. And you can catch your biggest bags of the year throwing a buzz bait in like 3 foot of water. 2 foot of water, even in clear water lakes.
Cool. As far as the riprap, there's so much riprap around the lake. It tends to be, my mind always goes there, basically year round. What do the different seasons look like in regard to all of that riprap? How would you fish them, and what baits?
Basically, I would stay off the riprap in the summer. You can catch some fish there, but it's not going to be nearly as effective as other things you could do. I would say the riprap is better in the colder months. So I would fish the riprap in November through maybe April. November through April, fish the riprap, and then April through back through like October, stay off the riprap. Would be my recommendation if you want to catch better than average fish. You can still catch fish there in the summer and stuff kind of randomly, but it's not going to be consistent. But in the colder months, this is probably the place to be, is on the riprap here, the riprap in here, and like the riprap over here we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. How do you decide what you're going to throw first? I mean, so many things are good. A jerk braid, and I know you've done an umbrella rig, a jig. I mean, how do you decide if you're up in the water column or down on bottom? Is it just where the bait fish are and where the fish are setting up?
Usually on cloudy, windy days, I throw the jerk bait in the Alabama rig. On sunny, calm days, I throw a jig and a crankbait.
Okay. I would actually have thought the opposite, I guess. That when it's windy, they'd be kind of more close to the bottom, but that's not the case.
I just find that they're more aggressive, so it's not like they're not on the bottom. A lot of times I'm fishing at Alabama rig too. I'm actually working it just right above the rocks. I just find that they get on these clear water lakes, they get spooky to the Alabama rig when it's not anymore, when it's not windy and cloudy. Sometimes if it's really windy and sunny, you can still get them on it, and if it's windy and sunny, you can get them on the jerkbait as well. But that wind is really key. When it's calm, that's when the crankbait and the jig are really key. But I find that the calm weather, you need that jerkbait bite is really, really tough when it's calm and sunny.
Okay. Well, and that's actually I'm glad you said that. That's a good question. This lake is nearly windy all the time. It's a big time sailing lake, renowned around the country because it's elevated and it gets a lot of straight line winds.
Gotcha.
So 9 days out of 10, you've got wind, but then, you also get out there and get bluebird skies and wind, which, like, when you're thinking about presentation, obviously, I guess summer's a little bit different. We've talked about those baits, but when you get out there and you've got a windy and bluebird day, what's your approach? Is it more of like, you always hear about cloudy, windy, or sunny and calm, but I get a mix of both.
So sunny and windy, really the wind will position those fish really well up shallow, or it'll just make them more aggressive. That wind always makes these fish more aggressive in general because it stirs up the water. It makes it harder for the bass to see the bait fish. So I always just say fish the windiest bank you can actually still fish in, where it's not like tossing you out of the boat. And the sun, for what I find, is that sun will push those fish. A lot of times when it's sunny and calm, it'll cause fish to suspend more. When it's cloudy, it'll push the fish more to the bottom in general. But with that wind, the clouds and the wind will actually combine, and it'll make those fish roam and push around a lot more up shallow, and they'll actually get they won't suspend, but they'll roam and push around up shallow more. And then when you get sun and wind, that wind will actually cause those fish to push tighter to cover and objects with the sun. And so the way I think about it is that calm, sunny days make the bass suspend. Sunny, windy days make the bass get tight to cover. Let me show you this. This will make it easier. So if it's like this here. So on sunny days, no wind, bass like to suspend, and they get really tough to catch. There are a few fish that will get tighter to cover around shade, and you can catch fish a lot of times around the shade of objects in the sun. That's really key. When it's windy and sunny, almost all the fish will get tight to the cover because they are ambushing bait fish and stuff. They're trying to move in and feed on the trees and on cover, and then they can ambush the bait fish. So I would say majority of your fish are within 3 to 4 feet of an object around a shadow when it's windy and sunny. When it's cloudy and no wind, it's just like kind of cloudy or whatever, bass will get tight to the bottom and they'll just randomly swim around. Just literally just swim around randomly. They're not setting up on anything. They just kind of hang out. When it's windy and cloudy, those bass will get, again, tighter to some sort of object, though they're not really related to any shadows. They're just kind of using these objects as like a current break. Again, as the bait fish move up, they're going to kind of hang around more objects. So in general, when you have wind, it positions fish tighter to cover. When you have less wind, they get further away from cover.
Okay. On those tough days, how would you target these fish in the summertime?
In the summertime, when those fish, I would basically go to the grass on days when you have sun, no wind. I would get as tight. A lot of those fish will get tight in the grass, and since you have grass there, that would be my number one. The other thing I would do is try to find any sort of like the thickest, brightest or thickest, darkest cover you can find. So brush piles, basically. So brush piles and like thick grass, that's the key. And then on days when it gets sunny and windy, you can get to the outside edge of the grass or maybe fish like something that's like a crankbait or a swim bait up on top of a brush pile or over the top of it. The bass will kind of get more aggressive, kind of. Mm-hmm. But I would say that a lot of the bass just suspend out here in the middle, so you're still not going to have a great day. I would say that 50%, 60% of your bass are going to be suspended in the middle doing nothing, and then 30, 40% of your bass will actually be around cover and be catchable. Or when it's windy and sunny, 90% of your bass are catchable.
So just try to hit the cover mainly.
Yep.
Okay. What about, I know we've got just a few minutes here, quick seasonal, avoiding winter, but spring, summer, fall, or I guess spring and fall, how are these fish going to act different in this lake?
I would say that in the fall, number one thing you can target is grass. Go throw a chatterbait in grass and just cover as much water as you can with the chatterbait in that shallow grass. You will find a group of good fish pulled up in the grass. Almost guaranteed. Okay. And I would just fish as much grass. One thing you can look for in the grass is if you can find these little like ditches and drains and turns, that's where you're going to find the best potential spots. So I would go on this map and I'd mark up every single little ditch like this. And if there's grass growing around this, throw a chatterbait through that. Throw a chatterbait through here. Throw a chatterbait like with this ditch right here, through here, this ditch, this ditch, this ditch. Just go from ditch to ditch to ditch. Throw in a chatterbait and you'll catch some good ones. That's all I would do. And then if the grass is not there, then the other thing I would do is just fish some of these rocks and rocky points in the mouths of these coves. So the mouths of the coves, even like the rock like right here, especially if they drop the lake a little bit, any sort of shallow rock that's in less than 10 foot of water, go throw a crankbait and a jig on it. Riprap banks, a little bit shallow offshore rock, just fish rock, rock, rock. And the same thing in the spring is the exact same stuff. Throw a chatterbait in the grass or a lipless crankbait in the grass, and then fish these rocks. The fall and the spring, you should fish the exact same stuff.
Okay. And usually in the spring, there's no grass. It usually comes up in the summertime.
Yeah.
But yeah, with all that riprap and like even the docks back there, how would you fish those docks? I mean, would you see fish back there? I mean, would you ever fish those docks?
I would maybe like right before the bass spawn, so like March, like maybe April, they might get up underneath them a little bit, and I might just pitch a jig around them, or like throw a wacky ray worm around them. And you could probably find a few fish here, a few fish there on the docks. I wouldn't say it would be a big deal. I would say honestly the best areas can be like basically this part of the lake right through here. Any sort of these little ditches and things that lead in here, these are all going to be really key in the spring pre-spawn. And then a lot of the bass will just spawn around, like all this rock right here. A lot of these bass will spawn down these riprap banks here. And you can actually catch them by just dragging like a shaky head and putting your boat out here. And a lot of these fish will spawn at the end of these rocks. So if you think about where the lake is, a lot of your bass spawn right here. And a lot of, especially because that water is a little bit clearer, a lot of your guys are fishing up on the rocks, like up here, where you should be casting right here. So you should be casting like
Okay.
this, maybe a half cast off the bank as opposed to casting all the way up on the bank.
And in the fall as well?
Yeah, in the fall as well. Yeah.
Okay. Would you target like a jig on
Jig
that
and a crankbait.
rock line in the fall?
Jig and a crankbait in the fall are really hard to beat.
Okay.
And then like a shaky head worm is like a shaky head and Ned rig. Those are really hard to beat in the spring on these clear lakes for those spawning fish.
Okay.
Yep. Also like a Carolina rig lizard or something like that. It's really good too.
Okay. I think if I have any other questions, yeah, that's real insightful. I mean, I've basically been fishing it all wrong for summertime. I tend to resort to those rocks because I feel like rocks will always have it, but I just the areas that I think of are the areas that every average Joe thinks of, and so I think the pressure makes it really tough out there. But yeah, give me a lot to think about for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad, and hopefully it'll help you get some good fish out there.
Yeah, I gotta go catch a new state record.
There we go. Well, appreciate it, Randy. Thanks for signing.
At least a late record, maybe.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. Well, thanks for signing up for another lesson, and I'm glad that you enjoyed the last one enough to sign up for another one. And best of luck on the water.
All right, appreciate it, John.
I'll send
Talk
out
later.
this recording probably Wednesday morning.
Okay, and then would you mind just including the link for you mentioned one?
Yep.
It was the how to get the waypoints on my graph.
Yep, I'll make sure I add that.
All right, appreciate it, man.
Yep,
Thanks.
Yep, bye.
Later.